The whole town fell silent when they heard the explosion. A column of smoke rose above the railway line, where an old chimney had stood for years. Soon after, a truck appeared. Its bed was filled with blackened bricks, driving east, across the river, toward a place people only spoke of in whispers, toward Treblinka. Without knowing it, the people of Malkinia had just witnessed a crucial moment of the Holocaust. The Germans had blown up a chimney so they could use its bricks to build gas chambers. Sounds absurd, but that's how primitive and improvised the Nazi genocide was. The year was 1942. Germany was fighting against the whole world. Its armies stretched across continents. And then came an unbelievable order from Berlin to exterminate millions of European Jews as quickly as possible. The question was, how? The existing methods of killing proved ineffective. Mass shootings attracted too much attention and required too much manpower. Even the toughest men had trouble shooting women and children. So the decision was made. Jews would be murdered industrially in dedicated death camps. But where to find the resources in the middle of a war? From wherever they could be scavenged. The first extermination camp in Chimney was nothing more than an old confiscated manor. Victims were driven inside and then from the basement through a sealed ramp directly into a gas van. Exhaust fumes from the engine were led into the closed compartment. After a few minutes, the entire cargo, as the Germans called it, fell silent. It was a quieter and more efficient way of killing, but still not enough. The overloaded vans were unstable, and the old manor soon began literally overflowing with the clothes of the victims. Yet Chimney showed the way. The final solution would be carried out with gas, in static gas chambers. And so the extermination camps of Bełżec, Sobibor and Treblinka began to rise. Once again, the Germans saved wherever they could. Bełżec was built on the old Soviet border. Why there? Because deep anti-tank ditches already scarred the ground, ready-made graves for the dead to come. The first gas chambers were housed in a single wooden building, divided inside into several small rooms and hidden beneath camouflage netting. Their double walls were packed with sand to make them airtight. Inside, the wooden walls were covered with tar paper. Gas poured in through a handful of fake showerheads. That crude construction, so simple you could build it in your backyard, was enough to kill tens of thousands. The rest of the camp was just as primitive. Barbed wire fences woven with pine branches served as camouflage. The German staff lived comfortably in nearby confiscated Polish homes. In Sobibor, the same ruthless thrift applied. The reception and living quarters were simply taken from Polish villagers, so the camp looked like a quiet settlement in the woods. The Germans even turned an old chapel into a lazaret, a hospital where the weak were shot instead of treated. Treblinka was the youngest of the three. It could learn from the others, and it did. But the same shortages and the same pressure for speed meant it began its work under painfully primitive conditions. Early Treblinka didn't even have a proper ramp. Trains stopped on bare sand. Only later was the platform raised and covered with asphalt. Survivor Samuel Willenberg remembered that the rail spur ended in nothing more than a mound of earth. They called Treblinka a factory of death, but in those early days it looked more like a lumber yard. Even the killing itself was far from efficient. The original 3 gas chambers couldn't keep up with the arriving transports. Sometimes the Germans were forced to shoot the newly arrived right by the ramp, and so a new building with 10 larger chambers began to rise. Once again, everything was done cheaply. Bricks were scavenged by blowing up the chimney of an old glassworks in nearby Malkinia. More bricks arrived with transports from the Warsaw ghetto. Airtight doors came from abandoned border bunkers. The gas engine was taken from a captured Soviet tank. This rough construction, built by enslaved prisoners from looted materials, would claim 500,000 lives. Later, new brick chambers were added in Bełżec and Sobibor as well. The wooden walls of the old chambers had become so soaked with the bodily fluids of the victims that they could no longer be cleaned. In Bełżec, the new chambers were ironically named after their builder, the Hackenholt Foundation. Soon, another problem emerged: body disposal. Rain flooded the mass graves. Bloated corpses began to rise and spill from the pits. Improvisation followed. They switched to burning the bodies, a solution that also happened to erase the traces. And once again, everything was done cheaply. Building crematoria was out of the question, too expensive. Open-air pyres made of railway tracks would do instead. According to one witness, the rails used in Bełżec were stolen from the local train station. The bodies burned poorly, but that didn't matter. Prisoners were ordered to crush the remains until everything passed through a sieve as fine ash. Efficient? No, but it worked. Manpower, too, had to be economized. Each camp was designed to function with as few men as possible. The peak of this twisted engineering was the Schlauch, the tube of death that led the victims to the chambers. In the narrow passage, guards only had to push the last rows. The rest were driven forward by the pressure of the crowd. As historian Patterson observed, the extermination camps resembled slaughterhouses, places built to move human beings the same way one drives herds of animals. The lack of staff was compensated with brutality. Victims were beaten so savagely that many rushed into the crude chambers, even when they sensed something was wrong. The walls at least shielded them from further blows. To increase efficiency, the SS even introduced something like on-the-job training. SS-man Mentz, once a milkman, didn't know how to properly shoot the weak in the lazaret. Inspector Worth later showed him the correct method: a shot to the base of the skull. With that single pill, Mentz later executed thousands of people in the lazaret. Even transportation had to be economized. Hundreds of thousands of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto were brought to Treblinka by only 2 train sets, running back and forth like a shuttle. Likewise, a single train carried tens of thousands to Bełżec, pendling between the camp and the ghettos of Galicia. The height of cynicism was that Jews paid for these death journeys themselves. The SS financed them with confiscated Jewish property, of which it had more than enough. The conclusion is clear. The Holocaust was not a high-tech, sterile operation. It was improvised, cheap, crude, assembled on the fly, and that is precisely what makes it terrifying. It didn't require genius. It didn't require money. It required only willing hands. That is the warning Treblinka carries into the present.